I'm 16 years old, nearly 17, and if we're going to be talking about legacy, that's as good a place to start as any. 16 years ago today, where were we? Where were you? Well, for some indicators, 16 years ago, last week, Googling becomes a word in the Oxford English Dictionary for the first time. And you probably laughed at that. 16 years ago, on this very day, Tony Blair announces his intention to resign as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And you probably laughed at that too. But 16 years ago, this week, Steve Jobs announces a new innovation, a new technology, the world's first smartphone, 16 years ago. 16 years happens in the blink of an eye, and in that blink, look how we've moved. Today, as we speak, 16 years on from the inception of the iPhone, what's going on right now is that on the social media site Reddit, users of the site are staging digital social media strikes against the platform for their new policies. Social media strikes. Could you have envisioned that 16 years ago? You couldn't. And all it shows and all it proves is that you cannot understand the legacy of today without first looking at it through the eyes of tomorrow. So, I'd like to take you on a bit of an exercise. 16 years happens in the blink of an eye. So I'd like you to blink with me and pretend that we're at TEDxQE in 2039 and you're watching me give a speech. And I would start this speech by asking, do you remember when we used to say that strikers were on walkouts? Or say that protesters were occupying something? Well, we stopped doing that now, don't we? We don't do that anymore because these days, protesters don't actually occupy anything real. And these days, strikers don't actually walk out of anything. I say that because as we speak on the 20th of June, 2039, Just Stop Oil is launching disruptive lock-on protests on your Twitter feed. And we're seeing destructive industrial action across the sectors from the Instagrammers Union. Welcome to 2039. Dissent is digital. And it's been this way for a very, very long time now, even if for a lot of that time, we didn't notice that. For example, do you remember 16 years ago, the Black Lives Matter protests? We didn't notice it then. Hashtag Blackout Tuesday, do you remember that? On the 2nd of June, 2020, Instagram users said they would only be posting black squares in solidarity against police brutality, and you might laugh, but the effects of that were disruptive and catastrophic. If you wanted to use Instagram for the day, tough luck. All you would find were black squares and hashtag Black Lives Matter written neatly by it. We didn't realize it then, but this was a hallmark for the way things would be from now on. This was the beginning of a turning point. Dissent was evolving before our very eyes, and we didn't notice. And that's why, right now, Just Stop Oil is protesting digitally. If I check my Twitter tonight, all I'm going to be finding is hashtag Just Stop Oil with pictures of oil spills by it. Hashtag Just Stop Oil. Because the digitalization of protest hasn't just made protest easier. It's done that, certainly. But it's also made protests just a tiny bit sexy. It's made protest hot. Protest is so very trendy right now. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. Hashtag Love is Love. Hashtag Free Palestine. Do you remember that? You teachers might. Because in 2021, early 2021, a teacher was caught by their students on phone calling the Palestinian flag a symbol of hatred. The footage circulated all over school kid Twitter in the UK, and it caused outrage, righteous outrage, but it didn't just cause outrage. It caused protests in our playgrounds. You teachers might remember seeing footage from your colleagues of students standing on top of desks shouting hashtag Free Palestine, hashtag Free Palestine scrawled on classroom walls. In some instances, classroom windows were even smashed in. And we didn't see this for what this was. This was the way things would be in the future. Protest would be created online. And we didn't see the other side of this either, did we? I remember at the time of these protests, a friend of mine told me about a girl he knew who had been posting supportively of the Palestinian protests, had the hashtag in her profile, as a lot of people her age did at the time. And so my friend asked her a couple of questions about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and she had no idea. And when the trend died out a couple of weeks later, she quietly dropped the hashtag from her profile as if it was just another out-of-fashion catchphrase. The problem with this era of digitalization and trendification wasn't one that we saw at the time. We didn't realize that the purpose of protest is to draw complex attention to deep issues, and the purpose of trends is to draw fleeting attention to surface-level issues. And when you mix the two, you create the risk of people who, despite having best interests at heart, care because it's what they're meant to care about, care because everyone else is caring about it, care because people say it's good to care about it, not caring enough to understand what it is they care about or why they should care about it. Surface-level empathy. And that's why, in the year 2039, protests have moved online, because it's never been easier to feel like you're making a change. All you have to do is post this thing, and congratulations, you've protested. And you can take that feeling of making real change instead of creating and seeing real change. Because, well, for all that outrage and moral public outcry that the Black Lives Matter protest created 16 years ago, I'm sorry to say this, but what actually changed? There was no systematic reform of the police system. There was no defunding the police, as much as people shouted for defunding of the police. In the US, police still wield military surplus weapons. Black people still get over-incarcerated and die disproportionately in custody. Since the Black Lives Matter protests, deaths and police brutality cases have only increased in number. Was that all that moral public outcry and attention was for when they took our social media feeds by storm? The problem with our era's digitalization and trendification of protest is that we have substituted the feeling of real change for real change. We're so satisfied to see our message spread that we ultimately forget why that message was meant to spread in the first place, what that message was meant to achieve. We see something, therefore we outrage. We outrage, therefore we protest. We protest, therefore we move on. Is this the way it should be? Because when I phrase it like that, it doesn't sound all that different to 16 years ago, does it? 16 years ago today, where were we? Where were you? You had no idea what was already happening. And you had no idea, we had no idea, that we had substituted real change for the feeling of real change long, long, long ago. Let's blink again. The most terrifying question a person can ask is, what happens next? Many before me have tried to answer that question, from George Orwell's vision in 1984 of a society controlled by hatred, to Ray Bradbury's book, Fahrenheit 451, a vision of a society controlled by censorship. But the vision and the answer to this question that I find most resonant and relevant for the era we might be about to find ourselves in is Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World, a vision of a society so distracted and content and satisfied in itself, fleetingly satisfied in itself, to even begin to want change. As esteemed literary critic and moral philosopher Neil Postman once said, George Orwell feared that we would be controlled by what we hate. Aldous Huxley feared that we would be controlled by what we so very, very much love. Or In the words of English funk band Jamiroquai, the future is made of virtual insanity. It's all right now. I've been Keiaron Joseph. Thank you so very, very much for listening, and I'll see you in 16 years.